Of Russian airstrikes bombarding more than 30 cities across Ukraine tonight. Ukrainian officials say it's the largest offensive. They say nearly 400 ballistic missiles and drones were used in the attack. At least 18 people, including 3 children, have been killed. The attacks come amid a historic prisoner swap between the two nations.
In December 2024, a Russian missile brought down an Azerbaijani civilian airliner, killing dozens of civilians, families, workers, and students. Moscow labelled the downing a tragic mistake, but offered no formal apology, fueling outrage across Azerbaijan. The Kremlin's response was seen not as an act of accountability, but as a calculated dismissal of responsibility. Baku's reaction was immediate and uncompromising. Within days, the Azerbaijani government grounded Russian flights and began tearing up trade agreements, signalling a decisive shift from diplomatic engagement to open defiance. This was not just a response to tragedy, it was the start of a high-stakes geopolitical contest. The plane that shattered an alliance. The destruction of Azerbaijan's passenger plane in December 2024 marked a rupture that would reshape the region's balance of power. The missile strike killed dozens of civilians, including entire families, and immediately erased any lingering sense of security or partnership between Baku and Moscow. What pushed this tragedy into a full-blown crisis was not only the loss of life, but also Russia's response. Moscow described the attack as a tragic mistake, characterizing it as an accidental outcome of regional operations. There was no formal apology, no admission of fault, only a brief statement that failed to address the scale of the loss. In Azerbaijan, this was seen as an insult layered atop disaster, igniting widespread outrage and accelerating the breakdown of trust that had been eroding for years. Public reaction was swift and overwhelming. Mass rallies erupted in Baku and beyond as citizens demanded accountability and a decisive government response. The anger was not just about the deaths themselves. It reflected accumulated resentment over Azerbaijan's long-standing frustrations with Moscow's dominance and disregard. The Kremlin's dismissive stance became a catalyst, transforming simmering grievances into a unified national outcry. The Azerbaijani government moved quickly to channel public anger into concrete action. All Russian-operated flights were grounded within hours, and airports across the country removed Russian carriers from their schedules. In a matter of days, Baku cancelled multi-million-dollar agreements that had underpinned decades of economic cooperation. The Kremlin's access to Azerbaijani oil markets and shipping routes began to unravel, threatening vital revenue streams and signalling that Azerbaijan would no longer accept a subordinate role in its relationship with Russia. Diplomatic communications left little room for ambiguity. Azerbaijani officials issued statements condemning Russia's actions as reckless and inhumane, directly naming Moscow as responsible for the deaths of Azerbaijani citizens. Every sanction and suspension reinforced Baku's pivot from tolerance to open defiance. Russian officials, for their part, brushed off the incident, offering no reparations and maintaining that the attack was simply an unfortunate byproduct of tense regional operations. This lack of genuine remorse confirmed, in the eyes of Azerbaijanis, that their lives were viewed as expendable in Moscow's broader geopolitical calculus. The rapid escalation forced Azerbaijan to reconsider its long-standing alliances. The government's decision to sever trade and transport ties was not a temporary measure. It was a structural shift toward greater independence. The economic consequences were significant. Azerbaijan risked losing access to key markets and investments, but the leadership calculated that sovereignty and national dignity outweighed these costs. Russian state-affiliated projects began to face more than just diplomatic resistance. The government initiated the shutdown of Russian cultural centers and signaled increased scrutiny of Russian media figures operating within Azerbaijan, foreshadowing a broader campaign to limit Moscow's influence across society. The symbolism of the passenger plane's destruction combined with Russia's refusal to accept responsibility, galvanized both the public and the political elite. Azerbaijan was no longer content to operate in Moscow's shadow. The tragedy became a rallying point for a new strategy, one that prioritized self-determination over economic convenience or historical ties. The government's actions were not only about retaliation, they were about asserting Azerbaijan's right to define its own future. As the dust settled from the initial wave of sanctions and diplomatic ruptures, it became clear that Azerbaijan's response extended well beyond the political and economic spheres. The next phase would target the cultural and social dimensions of Russian influence, a move that would test the nation's identity and unity in ways the Kremlin had not anticipated. Cutting cultural ties, a nation's identity shift. For Azerbaijan, the rupture of cultural ties with Russia became tangible in late June 2025, when the deaths of two Azerbaijani brothers in Russian custody in Yekaterinburg ignited a new wave of outrage. The brothers, detained on charges widely reported in Baku as fabricated, died under circumstances that many Azerbaijanis saw as targeted abuse. Their deaths crystallized years of accumulated resentment, transforming public anger into a catalyst for decisive government action against Russian cultural and informational influence. Azerbaijani authorities responded with a comprehensive crackdown. The government ordered the immediate closure of the Baku office of Sputnik, a Kremlin-backed media outlet accused by officials of operating as an FSB hub and spreading Russian state propaganda. This move was more than symbolic. Sputnik had served as a conduit for Moscow's narratives in Azerbaijan, reinforcing Russian positions on sensitive regional issues and amplifying the Kremlin's soft power. By shutting down its operations, Baku sought to reclaim control over the country's information space and to signal an end to Moscow's ability to shape public discourse. The measures extended beyond media. Russian-language schools across Azerbaijan were shuttered, cutting off a legacy that had persisted since the Soviet era. Until this point, Russian was widely viewed as essential for education and commerce, a practical tool for upward mobility and access to broader markets. The government's decision to close these institutions marked a significant cultural risk, especially given the language's prevalence among older generations and within elite circles. Yet the leadership judged that the imperative to reassert Azerbaijani identity outweighed the potential disruptions. Cultural events tied to Russia, film screenings, literary clubs, and language classes were systematically cancelled. The message was clear. The era of Russian cultural dominance had ended. Public sentiment aligned with these actions. The deaths of the brothers were seen as the latest in a pattern of exploitation, as one Azerbaijani official put it, a phrase that quickly became a rallying point for both government rhetoric and popular opinion. Many citizens believed that Russia had long treated Azerbaijan as expendable, using its influence to extract concessions and impose unequal terms. The government's moves resonated deeply, not only as acts of retaliation, but as a matter of national dignity. For many Azerbaijanis, the removal of Russian language programs and cultural institutions was a necessary step in restoring respect and self-determination. The closure of Sputnik's office reverberated internationally. It was an explicit challenge to Russia's model of projecting influence through media and cultural outreach. By framing Sputnik as an extension of Russian intelligence, Azerbaijani authorities justified their actions on both security and sovereignty grounds. The timing of the crackdown, coming in the wake of the brothers' deaths and following earlier economic and diplomatic measures, demonstrated a coordinated strategy to curtail Moscow's reach in every sphere. This campaign to dismantle Russian cultural influence was not without risks. Russian remains a second language for many Azerbaijanis, and its sudden removal from public life risked alienating segments of the population. The government, however, maintained that fostering a national culture free from Russian dominance was worth the cost. By stripping away Soviet-era language programs and Russian media, Baku signaled that its future identity and alliances would be defined on its own terms, no longer in Moscow's shadow. The transformation was not limited to symbolic gestures. It marked a structural reorientation of national identity, one that prioritized Azerbaijani language, culture, and historical narrative. The government's actions sent a message to both domestic and international audiences. Azerbaijan was asserting its independence in every domain, closing the chapter on a relationship defined by subordination and exploitation. This deliberate cultural shift set the stage for a broader realignment. As the world focused on the escalating rift with Russia, Azerbaijan began to seek out new partners and alliances, moves that would soon reshape the regional balance of power. Allies in the shadows. Azerbaijan's strategic pivot. Azerbaijan's strategic pivot began with a deliberate recalibration of its alliances, moving away from Moscow's orbit and toward partnerships that could provide military, economic, and diplomatic leverage. At the center of this realignment stood Turkey, Israel, and the United States, each offering distinct advantages and each motivated by overlapping interests in the South Caucasus. The partnership with Turkey was anchored by the 2021 Shusha Declaration. This agreement was not merely symbolic, it established binding military commitments. The declaration stipulated mutual defense in the event of aggression, joint military training, and coordinated modernization of armed forces. The timing and location, the city of Shusha, retaken by Azerbaijani forces, delivered a clear signal. Turkey's support for Azerbaijan's territorial integrity was unequivocal. Turkish and Azerbaijani forces began conducting regular joint exercises, increasing their interoperability and reinforcing the credibility of their alliance. Beyond the military sphere, the Shusha Declaration promoted economic and energy cooperation, including the development of the Zangezur corridor to strengthen trade and bypass Russian and Iranian transit routes. For Azerbaijan, these initiatives offered both a shield against external threats and a path to greater independence in regional commerce. Azerbaijan's alliance with Israel added another layer of strategic depth. The partnership first drew international attention during the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, when Israeli drones, most notably the Harop loitering munition, decisively neutralized entrenched Armenian defenses. This technology outperformed Russian-supplied systems, highlighting Azerbaijan's willingness to source advanced weaponry outside Moscow's sphere. In the aftermath of the 2024 civilian airliner incident, cooperation between Azerbaijan and Israel intensified. According to Azerbaijani and Israeli statements, the two countries expanded their collaboration to include air defense systems and intelligence sharing. Israel saw Azerbaijan as a critical partner due to its shared border with Iran, providing a vantage point for monitoring Iranian activities. For Baku, access to Israeli defense, technology, and intelligence networks offered a counterbalance to both Russian and Iranian pressure. The relationship grew increasingly structured, with regular exchanges of intelligence and coordinated security planning, underscoring the strategic value each side placed on the partnership. The United States, meanwhile, deepened its engagement with Azerbaijan across several fronts. While cooperation on counterterrorism and military training had long been a feature of the relationship, the period following the 2024 incident saw a marked increase in American support. US advisors worked with Azerbaijani forces to modernize border security and enhance surveillance capabilities. Intelligence sharing became more robust, allowing Azerbaijan to better anticipate regional threats and withstand diplomatic or military pressure from larger neighbors. Washington recognized Azerbaijan's growing role in European energy security, particularly as Baku expanded its oil and gas exports to Europe via pipelines that circumvented Russia. This economic interdependence provided further incentive for the US to invest in Azerbaijan's stability. viewing it as a bulwark against Russian and Iranian influence in the region. Each of these partnerships, Turkey's military guarantees, Israel's technological edge, and America's intelligence and security backing, served a distinct function in Azerbaijan's strategic calculus. The alliances were not reactive measures but carefully cultivated relationships designed to maximize Azerbaijan's autonomy and influence. By participating in joint military drills, developing new infrastructure, and integrating advanced defense systems, Azerbaijan demonstrated that it was not simply seeking protection. Instead, it was building the capacity to shape regional outcomes on its own terms. For Russia, these developments represented a significant erosion of its traditional leverage in the South Caucasus. Azerbaijan's willingness to diversify its alliances and invest in independent capabilities signaled that future negotiations would occur from a position of strength, not dependency. The new network of partnerships also altered the calculations of other regional actors, particularly Iran, which viewed the growing Azerbaijani-Israeli cooperation with increasing concern. This strategic realignment set the stage for a new phase in Azerbaijan's foreign policy, one that would leverage not only military and diplomatic alliances, but also ambitious infrastructure projects. The next step would test whether Azerbaijan could translate its geopolitical gains into lasting economic and strategic advantages. The Middle Corridor. Azerbaijan's endgame. Cargo volumes along the Middle Corridor have more than doubled in 2 years, underlining the route's rapid ascent as a new artery for Eurasian trade. This corridor, stretching from Central Asia through the Caucasus and Turkey to Europe, has placed Azerbaijan at the center of a fundamental shift in regional logistics. In 2023, 6.5 million tons of cargo moved along this route. Projections indicate that figure could reach 15 million tons by 2025. These numbers highlight not just traffic, but the scale of Azerbaijan's emergence as a pivotal transit hub, one that bypasses both Russia and Iran, challenging decades of established trade patterns. China's involvement has been central to this transformation. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, Beijing has invested heavily in Azerbaijan's infrastructure, most notably funding the expansion of the port of Alat near Baku. This facility anchors a network of rail and sea links connecting Central Asia to Western markets, increasing Azerbaijan's capacity to handle growing shipments. The technical upgrades at Alat, paired with new rail connections to Kazakhstan and Georgia, have enabled faster, more reliable transit. For China, the Middle Corridor offers a direct and efficient route to Europe, circumventing the logistical risks and political volatility associated with Russian and Iranian territory. For Azerbaijan, these investments represent a calculated step toward economic independence and greater geopolitical leverage. The corridor's primary advantage lies in its ability to circumvent traditional choke points. By avoiding Russian and Iranian territory, the Middle Corridor undercuts Moscow's leverage over regional trade and energy flows. Each shipment that travels this route translates to revenue and influence lost for Russia, a trend that has not gone unnoticed in Moscow. Russian state media now frame Azerbaijan as a competitor rather than a partner, escalating rhetoric and warning of instability. These reactions reflect a clear cause and effect. As Azerbaijan's control over Eurasian transit grows, Russia's ability to dictate terms in the region diminishes. Iran faces a similar challenge. The Zangezur Corridor, a planned transport link passing through southern Armenia to connect Azerbaijan proper with its Nakhchivan exclave, is a key element of Baku's strategy. Tehran views this link as a direct threat to its influence in the Caucasus and has publicly warned it will take any necessary measures to counter perceived encroachment. The prospect of trade flows bypassing Iranian territory has heightened tensions, with Iranian officials issuing increasingly pointed statements. The Middle Corridor's success would not only weaken Tehran's position as a transit state, but also limit its ability to shape outcomes in the South Caucasus. For Azerbaijan, the economic implications are substantial. Beyond energy exports, transit fees from this corridor now account for a growing revenue stream, transforming Azerbaijan into an indispensable hub for goods, raw materials, and energy. This diversification reduces vulnerability to fluctuations in oil and gas prices and anchors the country's economy in the broader movement of Eurasian trade. Partnerships with Kazakhstan and Georgia have expanded the corridor's reach, integrating regional rail networks and supporting long-term cooperation. Azerbaijan's centrality is not just geographic, it is structural, as the country becomes the linchpin in a system that connects Central Asia to Europe. The Middle Corridor's growth is closely tied to Azerbaijan's alliances with Turkey, Israel, and the United States. Turkish investments and military guarantees under the Shusha Declaration provide security for critical infrastructure. Israel's technological support strengthens oversight and resilience, while the United States offers political backing and financial resources. These partnerships help counter potential opposition from Russia and Iran, ensuring the corridor's continued expansion. The result is a network that is both economically viable and politically sustainable, reinforcing Azerbaijan's position as a regional power. Europe's interest in the Middle Corridor has intensified as nations seek alternatives to Russian-controlled supply chains. Azerbaijan's role as a reliable transit country offers European states access to energy and goods without the geopolitical risks of relying on Moscow. This new reality gives Baku leverage in negotiations and strengthens its standing in international forums. The corridor is no longer just an infrastructure project. It is a strategic asset that redefines Azerbaijan's place in global affairs. Azerbaijan's approach demonstrates how infrastructure can serve as a tool of national strategy, not just economic development. Every port expansion, rail link, and customs agreement is part of a broader effort to secure autonomy and shape the regional order. As the Middle Corridor matures, Azerbaijan's influence continues to grow, forcing neighboring powers to reconsider their assumptions and adjust their strategies. The story of the Middle Corridor is not only about trade, it is about a nation's deliberate effort to rewrite its role in the world. These developments show that Azerbaijan's choices have produced lasting change in the balance of power. The consequences extend far beyond economics, raising questions about how other nations might respond to a shifting landscape where calculated strategy can redefine influence and independence. From the opening gambit of the downed passenger jet to the endgame of the Middle Corridor, Baku has proven it can play chess with the heavyweights. Azerbaijan's shift shows that even mid-sized powers can leverage alliances and infrastructure to rewrite the rules of the game. No longer constrained by larger neighbours, Azerbaijan now stands as a proactive force in the South Caucasus, using calculated partnerships and strategic investments to redefine its regional role. Who will be the next to claim their independence from old alliances? The board is set, and the pieces are moving. If you found this deep dive useful, hit subscribe and ring the bell for more on how small states are rewriting global power rules.